What's up guys, and welcome to this complete beginner's 3D tutorial. So in this video, you're going to learn all of the fundamentals of modeling, texturing, shaders, and unwrapping, and we'll make this stylized flower model together, which is hopefully going to help you to learn a lot in a short amount of time. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hey, also guys, I decided to include a bonus chapter introducing you to Sculpt mode in Blender, so I just added it to the end of the video, you can check that out. But yeah, now let's actually start. Alright, so welcome to this Blender for Beginners tutorial. Let's get started right away. So at first, you'll have this splash art on your screen. It varies between version to version, but all you have to do is just hit General where it says New File, so just click on that. And okay, so we're in a new file now. So firstly, let's talk about moving around the viewport and how to navigate that. If you use the scroll wheel, you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out, just like I'm doing here. Just regular scrolling. And if you want to rotate around your scene, you can hold the middle mouse button. So click the middle mouse button, and then just move your mouse. And this is going to allow you to rotate around your scene, just like this. You can also hold Shift and the middle mouse button. So middle mouse button and Shift both held down at the same time. And what this will let you do is if you move your mouse, you can basically pan across your screen. So get comfortable with that, because it's very important that you know those hotkeys so that you can easily move around your scene. One other thing that I like to do a lot is instead of just using the regular scroll, like you can see this is just me regularly using my scroll wheel, what I like to do a lot of the times is I hit Control, so I'm holding down Control, and I'm going to hold down my middle mouse button. And what this will let you do is it will let you zoom in a way that's just way more smooth. So oftentimes I might, zoom in on my model, rotate around a bit maybe. If I want to zoom out instead of just doing this, I tend to like to just hold Control and middle mouse button and then just drag out like this because it's way smoother. So that's something I will use a lot of the time. So we have our scene here. If you want to select an object, all you have to do is click on it. So you can see we have our cube here, we have a point light here, and we have a camera here. These are just the basic things that are added to your scene when Blender opens up. In the top right here, as you can see, we have what's called the object outliner. And this will just show you all of the current objects and collections that you have in your scene. So you can see we have a camera, a cube, and a light, and you can select them here as well. If you want to have multiple objects selected at the same time, you can hold Shift while clicking. It doesn't matter whether you do it in the outliner or in the viewport, same thing. You can just hold Shift if you want to select multiple objects. Below the object outliner in the top right here, we have the properties panel on the bottom right here, which has a bunch of stuff, and it might seem a little bit intimidating at first, but don't worry too much. The one that we're mainly going to focus on here is this wrench icon, this Modifiers tab here. That's the one you'll be using the most. The other ones have their purposes, but modifiers are most important. Additionally, if you have an object selected, or even if you don't, you can hit N on your keyboard in your 3D view, which will bring up what's called the N panel. And here is where, if you go to this item tab here, you can see it basically just has information about our object, like the location, rotation, scale, dimensions, and all of that. You don't have to worry about this too much though, to be honest, because I really never really even use this panel at all. I always just do all of my modeling in the 3D space here. So you don't have to worry about this much. Tool, I pretty much never use this either. View, I never really use this either. Only once in a blue moon if I want to change the focal length, but that's another topic. Additionally, in the N panel, it's where you'll have all of your add-ons or anything like that that you've installed into Blender, but that's another topic. So I'm going to hit N to close that panel now because we really don't need it. So yeah, you left-click to select an object, and if you right-click on an object, you'll get this big menu here that comes up, and to be honest, I usually never use this. The only time you'll ever see me using it is with these shade smooth features here, which we'll get into later once again. But for now, let's just talk about some basic modeling stuff. In order to delete an object, all you have to do is select that object. So I'm going to select our camera because usually whenever I do projects in Blender, I'll always delete the camera and the point light first because I don't need them. So I'm just going to select both of them using Shift Select, or you can just do it one at a time, it's up to you. And I'm just going to hit X to delete them. And you might get a pop-up menu here if you're using a newer version of Blender like I am. Older versions don't have this pop-up menu, but you just hit X to delete them. Very easy, just like that. And I'm also going to delete this cube here as well. I'm going to hit X to delete and just delete that. And by the way, if you want to undo any operation that you've done, like for example, we just deleted 3 objects, you can hit Control Z on your keyboard, which will undo whatever you just did. So you can see here, I'm just hitting Control Z on my keyboard, and what that's doing is it's just undoing everything we just did. And if you want to redo, you can hit Control Shift Z. And what that will do is it will go back and just basically redo whatever you just did. Okay, so now let's talk about object mode versus edit mode. So when you have an object in Blender, you'll usually be in object mode or edit mode when you're trying to manipulate it. So it's important to know the difference. Basically, if you click on an object, you can hit tab on your keyboard to toggle in and out of edit mode or object mode. So you can see edit mode is this one here where you can see basically like the wireframe of your model kind of. You can see the vertices, the faces, the edges, and object mode is just kind of like the whole object selected, right? Additionally, up here, you can switch between object mode and edit mode if you don't want to use the tab key, although I highly recommend you just use the tab key because it's way faster, but you do have the option to switch up here as well in the top left. So let's start off by talking about edit mode and what it's used for. Basically, edit mode is how you can actually manipulate the geometry of your model, meaning the vertices, faces, edges, and all of that good stuff. In edit mode, at the top left of your screen, we can switch between vertex, edge, and face select mode. Vertex, edge, and face select. Additionally, while you're in edit mode, you can just hit 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard, which will toggle between them, which is generally what I always do. I just use the hotkeys because it's way faster. So 1, 2, and 3. So if we're in vertex select mode, I'm just going to hit 1 on my keyboard. You can see we can click on vertices, and the same goes for edge and face select mode. So if I go to edge select mode, now I can select edges. Face select mode, I can now select faces on my model. So I'll hit 1 to go back to vertex select mode, so you can see now if we toggle between them, it basically just changes like what we have selected, whether we want vertices, edges, or faces. One important thing to know also is if you hit A on your keyboard in edit mode, it will select all of the vertices of your model just like this. And then you can hit A twice, meaning AA, in order to deselect everything in your model. If you want to select multiple vertices or faces or edges instead of just one, like if I want multiple vertices, instead of just selecting one, all you have to do is hold the shift key while you're selecting and then you can get multiple ones. So just like this, you can select multiple, just like that. And if you want to find the shortest path between two vertices, which can be really useful sometimes, between two faces, edges, or vertices, you can click on one and then control click on the other. And then what it will do is it will basically select a path going from the first vertex you selected, and it'll just find the shortest path to the last one. And that's just something that's very useful sometimes in modeling. You can do it with edges as well. Select one edge and then control click, it'll find the path. And you can keep on control clicking after as well. You don't have to stop, it's totally up to you. Same with faces, you can control click and it will find the path. Okay, so now in order to actually move around these faces and vertices and all of this stuff, you can make a selection and then hit G on your keyboard to move it around. And then left click once you're done. Now I'm going to control Z to undo that because generally what I do instead of just hitting G is that I'll hit G and then I'll hit X, Y, or Z in order to basically snap it to an axis while I move it. So if I hit GZ, you can see now it's moving only along the Z axis. If I do GX, it'll only move along the X axis. GY only along the Y axis. If you do G Shift Z, it will move it on every axis except the Z. Same goes for G Shift Y. It'll do every axis except the Y axis, just like that. So that's just some important stuff to know. Of course, you can do this with edges as well, not just faces and vertices, whatever you want. It's totally up to you. One other thing that's really important I want to talk about is if you hit G to move around something or basically do any operation in Blender, of course you could finish it and then hit Ctrl Z to undo. But what I like to do a lot of the times is I will be making an operation, like I hit G here to move this around, and I'll hit escape, which will basically cancel the operation, so we don't even have to do the Ctrl Z to undo it. So sometimes I might be like, maybe I want to move this here. No, I don't think so. I'll just hit escape on my keyboard to cancel that. Another concept I want to talk about regarding vertices and edges is something called edge and vertex sliding. So if I select a vertex, you can hit GG on your keyboard, and what that's going to do is allow you to slide it along an edge that it's attached to, which is very useful sometimes. I'm going to hit escape to cancel that. But yeah, you can do that for a vertex or an edge as well. If I hit GG, you can edge slide just like this, and then left click once you're done. Very, very simple. So now let's talk about scaling. I'm going to go back to face select mode by hitting 3 on my keyboard, and if I select a face, you can hit S on your keyboard to scale it, just like that. And of course, you can also snap it to an axis by doing S, X, Y, Z, Shift Z. It's just totally up to you what you want to use. But yeah, another thing is rotating. So if I do R, just like scaling and moving with S and G, you can use R to rotate, and then RX, RY, same exact thing as before. Now let's talk about extruding, which is another common thing in modeling. Basically, if you select some face and hit E on your keyboard, you can extrude, and then left click to finish. You can of course use this as much as you like and on whatever face you want. So just like this, I'm just extruding. You can scale as well with the S key, just like this. Keep in mind, with extruding, by default, it's going to basically go in the direction on how the face is pointing. So if I hit E to extrude here, you can see it's snapping to this axis based on what the face was pointing to, which is called the normal of the face, by the way. That's just another commonly used term. And if you don't want this to happen, you can just hit Z on your keyboard, and that will basically unlock it. So now you can have it going in whatever type of direction you want, maybe like that, if you want to rotate it or do whatever. Now this object is getting a little bit weird, so I'm just going to hit X to delete it. Keep in mind, guys, if you want to fully delete an object, make sure you do it in object mode, not in edit mode. And I'm going to hit Shift A and go to Mesh Cube so we can continue with this tutorial from a fresh cube. If you hit Shift A, you can see we have all these different types of meshes you can add, like a cylinder, for example. So yeah, anyways, I'm going to go back into edit mode because that's what we're working on right now. One thing I want you guys to be careful of is if you extrude, by the way, and you hit Escape, it won't completely cancel the operation, actually. If I hit G on this face, you can see actually what it did was it just kind of like reset this extruded face to where it originally came from. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Usually, when I'm insetting, if I want to undo it, I'll just like finish the operation and then hit Control Z to undo. So just keep that in mind. Using Escape here doesn't work as well, so I recommend you just extrude, and if you don't like it, just hit Control Z to undo. And that'll make sure there's no issues happening with your model. Okay, another thing with extruding is if you have multiple faces selected, like let's say I had these 3 faces selected and I wanted to extrude. If I hit E, you can see Blender doesn't really know what to do with it exactly. It just gets messed up, and I don't like it, so usually my habit is I'll just hit Escape and then Control Z to undo that if that's happening. So now we are back to where we were before. And what I do in situations like this is I'll hit E, right click, which is going to basically pretty much do the same thing that Escape does, which is position our extrusion back at where it originally came from. And then we can hit Alt S on our keyboard, which is basically going to move the faces along their normals. So now we can kind of extrude along multiple axes, like coming out of our selection, which is just really useful. So you can see if I want to do it again, just select the faces, E, right click, Alt S, just like that. I'm just going to undo that though. So yeah, I'm just going to undo this really quickly. And okay, so that's extruding. And that Alt S key that I was using, what it basically does is it will move a face, edge, or vertex along its normals. What a normal is, it's basically just the direction a face is pointing. So this face is pointing up, this one on the right here is pointing to the side. So if I hit Alt S, you can see it'll move along that. Let me just drag this edge down and maybe drag this one up so you guys can see clearly. So now this face is pointing kind of like at this type of angle. So if we hit Alt S, you can see it's going to move along basically just the direction it's pointing. Same with the vertices. If I hit Alt S, I know it's harder to see with vertices where they're pointing, but if you want to know what direction they're pointing in, if you hit Alt S, it'll basically go along that direction, just like that. Okay, one other thing that sometimes comes in handy is that if you do an operation, like let's say I wanted to move something, and I did like GX to move, what you can do is you can actually type in a value on your keyboard. So if I do like 4, it'll move 4 units or 4 meters along the X-axis, just like that, and then you can either click or hit Enter on your keyboard to finish. So that's just something that can be useful sometimes if you want to get like an exact number. Maybe if I wanted to rotate this face by like 90 degrees or 45 degrees, you can do like RX 45 and then hit Enter. And that can just be something that's useful once in a while. Okay, so now let's talk about insetting. Insetting is pretty fun. Basically, if we select a face and hit I, it will inset on that face. You can drag with your mouse and just inset just like this. And then left click once to complete the operation. Oftentimes this is used with extruding, so like I'll inset and then maybe I'll extrude up or down. Maybe down looks pretty cool here. So you can just keep on insetting and extruding. It's a pretty fun combination to work with. Keep in mind if you have adjacent faces, like let's say I had these 2 faces, or maybe let's just do these 2 faces for example. If you hit the I key, what it's going to do is it will basically inset them together. As you can see here, it's kind of treating them as one face in a way. And this might be what you want, so you might be like, hey, that looks cool. I'll left click to finish that, and this looks nice. But if that's not what you wanted, let's hit Control Z to undo that. Let's select these faces again, hit I, and if you hit I again while you're insetting, what it will do is it will basically now treat them as separate faces, if that's what you want. So then you can finish that and, do your extruding or whatever you want. And you can see that extrusion got a little bit messed up because what we should be doing, since we have multiple faces selected like this that are going along a different axis, we should hit E, right click, Alt S, and now you can see that inset is much better. So yeah, extruding is a cool thing to do, and it's honestly like really useful. Okay, so now would be a good time, I think, to talk about transform pivot points. Now that might sound a little bit complicated, but trust me, it's very simple. Basically, let's say we had two faces, this face and this face, and I wanted to scale them, right? So if I hit S on my keyboard to scale them, what you can see is happening is they're kind of like scaling into each other, and the reason why that's happening is because our transform pivot point is set to median points. So basically what that does is it just finds like a midpoint between the two so that it can scale to that. So I'm going to hit escape to cancel this. If you go up here, you can see in the transform pivot point menu, we can switch it to individual origins, which now if we hit S on our keyboard to scale, you can see they are going individually now, just like this. And using individual origins allows us to scale without them like influencing each other. So that's just something that can be useful a lot of times if you want to adjust multiple faces at once like this. Or if maybe like I insetted here and extruded out. And if I did the same on the right side here, and maybe I wanted to basically make both of these two faces smaller. If we were using median point, this would happen, which is not what we want. And if we use individual origins, it'll be nice like this, and it'll just scale them separately. So that's why using individual origins can be useful sometimes. We also have 3D cursor, active element, and bounding box, which perhaps we'll talk about later. Once in a while I'll use 3D cursor, bounding box center I pretty much never use, so you don't have to worry about that. Active element, I very rarely use this, but like once in a while it will be useful. So yeah, we'll talk about those other two methods a bit later. Okay guys, one other concept I want to talk about is called the beveling. So if you go into edit mode, on pretty much any edge in any object, what you can do, if we select this one up here for example, you can hit Control B on your keyboard to bevel. And as you bevel, if you basically just drag, it will bevel that edge. And you can scroll up or down on your mouse wheel to add more or less cuts in between that. So just like this, you can add as many as you like, and then just left click once you're done. And what that does is it will bevel it. Now, obviously it looks a bit weird here because of the nature of this type of edge, but if I were to, for example, just add a cube again, just a regular cube, and move it over here, and hit tab to go into edit mode, if I select an edge and hit Control B to bevel, you can see it's going to be way cleaner on a simple object like this. So just keep that in mind. You can use Control B to bevel, and there are just like a ton of use cases for this and like why it would be useful, as you can see here. So yeah, it's really up to you. One other thing I want to talk about is that if you're in edit mode on a mesh, you can hit Shift A just like in object mode, and within a mesh you can add more geometry by clicking any of these. So for example, if I add a cube, which is going to spawn at the 3D cursor, which is right here, this basically red and white checkered looking circle, we can move it here, and you'll see since we added it in edit mode, if we hit tab to go back into object mode, it's going to be basically one object, right? Because since we added it in edit mode, that means it's not its own object, it's just more geometry in one object, and that's how you can think about it. So here's a cute little diagram that explains it a bit. In object mode, you can kind of like edit the object, which usually that's just moving around, rotating, or scaling the object. And then in edit mode, that's where you can actually edit the geometry and do all of that. So just like you can on this object here, you can do any of the, regular modeling tactics like insetting, extruding, blah, 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 and it'll just be one object like that. Another concept I want to introduce you to now is this concept called proportional editing. So if I go into edit mode and I hit this button up here, you see this circle. You can hit O on your keyboard to enable and disable it, by the way. So I usually always will just use O, which enables it. And so whether you're in face, edge, or vertex select mode, it doesn't matter. If you move anything around, you're going to get this circle now that appears. And basically, if you move, rotate, or scale anything, now it's going to have this circle of influence, if that makes sense. So if I hit G, you can see it's not just affecting the vertex we have selected, but it's also affecting the ones around it, just like that. And when you're doing an operation, like if I hit G, if you scroll on your mouse wheel, this is going to increase and decrease the area of influence. So you could see decreasing it makes that area of influence less, and increasing the circle by scrolling down is going to make that area like a lot more. Now, right now when we use it, you could see it's basically just affecting everything within the circle. But if, for example, you only want it to affect this geometry on the left side here, what you can do is click on this connected only button, and now it's only going to affect the vertices that are connected to it. So it's no longer going to affect this unless we select the vertex here and then move this one. But then it won't affect this one because this one's not connected, right? So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Proportional editing is very, very useful, and it can be used whether you want to use G to move things, whether you want to use R to rotate things, or S to scale. it can just be very, very useful in many different situations. Next thing I want to talk about is the 3D cursor. You might have saw there when we added this mesh in. The mesh spawns where the 3D cursor is, right? So if you want to move your 3D cursor, you just shift right click and hold. So if I shift right click, it's going to put it there wherever my cursor is. But if you hit shift right click and hold, you can kind of like move it and drag it around. Keep in mind that this isn't something that you can undo. So if I hit Control Z, it's not going to undo anything. I'm not sure why that is, but for some reason the 3D cursor movement is not something you can undo. In any case, if I hit Shift A to add a new object, whatever it be, like a monkey for example, anything you add now is going to be at that 3D cursor. Now to set your 3D cursor back to the world origin, you can hit Shift C, and as you can see now, it's been set back to the world origin, just like that. Alright guys, one other really important thing I want to mention is centering objects in your view. So right now, as we move our camera around, the camera isn't really centered around anything. However, if I select an object and I hit numpad period, my viewport will now basically focus on that object. Additionally, if you go into edit mode, select anything like a face, edge, vertex, if you hit numpad period on it, it's going to put your viewport centered around that vertex, edge, or face, just like this. So that's how that works. Additionally, if you select multiple objects, it's going to center on all of them, just like that. So that's just another useful tip to know. Now I'm going to take this object here and just move it to the side. I'm going to add now a new cube that I want to demonstrate some new modeling tactics on. So I want to introduce you to something called loop cuts. So if I hit tab to go into edit mode, if you hit Control R, you can move your mouse around and basically you can add what are called loop cuts. So if I have it set to be going across our model like this, you can just scroll up on your mouse wheel to get more or less loop cuts. So let's say I want 4. This is 4 right here. All you have to do is just left click to finish, and you can basically drag it wherever you want. I usually just right click, which sets it in the center. That's pretty much what I always do. And so loop cuts are very useful because they let you add these nice cuts in your model, right? So if I hit Control R once again for more practice, you can scroll up maybe like twice or 3 times here, left click, move wherever you want, or if you don't want to move it anywhere, just like right click and it's gonna set back into center place. So now you can see we have all of this new geometry on our model. I want to talk to you more about different selection modes now. So to select multiple vertices or edges or faces, it's very intuitive. You just select one, shift select another, shift select, and you can keep on adding to that selection. There's another thing though called shortest path selection mode. So if I select a face and I control click on a face like down here for example, it's going to find the shortest path between the two and select that. And you can basically keep on hitting control and it's going to keep on just adding to that selection by finding the shortest path. You can do this with vertices as well. So if I select this one and then control click here, it'll find the shortest path. Then I control click here, it will find the shortest path there as well. And still while you're doing this, if you hold shift, you can manually select any other vertices that you want and just add even more to that selection. And if you continue to control click, keep in mind the vertex face or edge that you have active, which is denoted by, you can see it's white here, so it means this one is active. So then if I like control click here for example, the shortest path is going to be based on what was active previously, right? That's just something you're going to get like really used to as you model, so don't worry about that being complex or anything. It's very repetitive and you'll get used to it. Another selection method I want to talk about is selecting a loop or edge loop along your model. So if I go to edge select mode or in vertex or face select mode, it works in all of these. Basically, if you alt click, it's going to select the loop going around that. So if I select this one here, for example, this edge, it's going to select that loop going around the model. Similar here, if I select this one, it'll select the loop. And if you want to select multiple, of course, you can alt select one, then alt shift select another, alt shift select to add it to your selection just like that. Of course, this works in face select mode as well, just like that. And of course, in vertex select mode too, it works. And this is just nice because it then allows you to select those edge loops way easier. There's another selection mode that I don't really use often at all, but if you alt control click on an edge, it's kind of weird, but what it does is it selects like the rings around your model, or at least tries to. Sometimes it gets a bit messed up. Let me add a new cube to show you guys clearly. So if I alt control click here, what it does, as you can see, it selects basically the rings going around this model. So that's something I don't use that much, but it's just useful to know once in a while. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about regarding loop cuts is, let's say I just extruded back here, for example, and then, I don't know, I did some like weird modeling tactic where I brought like this down, this up, this down, and just made like some really odd, crazy shape like this for whatever reason. And then I wanted to add another loop cut going along the center like this, so I hit Control R, left click, and then right click. You can see what happened here was that the loop cut got like a bit slanted. Like you can see here the edge is slanted, here it's slanted too, and we don't always want that. Oftentimes you want it to be as straight as possible. So to fix this, what you can do is you can hit S, Z, and you can scale along the Z axis, and if you just hit 0 on your keyboard, you can flatten it on the x-axis to 0, so that will then flatten it, and it'll be straight then. If you hit GG to edge slide though, it might get messed up still, but that's still something you can always just fix by hitting SZ0 to flatten it. One other thing I want to talk about regarding selection modes is, let's just say I had a bunch of vertices selected here, and just, I don't know, I'm going to select these like this. If you do Control Shift right click, you can create the lasso deselection tool, which is what I like to use a lot to deselect things. So if I use it here, Control Shift right click, you can deselect whatever you want. Normally to select vertices and stuff like that, I just left click on my mouse, which automatically brings the box select tool, and we'll just select whatever you have inside the box. That's what I always use pretty much. But if you want, you can hit Control right click, and you might find this easier. You can use the lasso select tool, so yeah, that's just another option you have. One other selection tool that you have in Blender is if you hit C on your keyboard, you can enable the circle select, which you can scroll up and down with to increase and decrease the circle size. Basically, all you have to do is just click and hold, and you can just select things like that. And then you hit Enter on your keyboard once you're done. And that's just another way that you can easily select things. Another way to easily access the circle select tool, and I'm going to tell you this because sometimes your selection default might get messed up, but you can hit W on your keyboard to switch. If you look up here on the top left, this is our default, this orange select box thing, that's our default. But if you hit W, you can switch it to circle select by default. W again, it will switch to lasso select by default, and then W once more. I actually don't know what this is, to be honest, this tweak thing. I guess like it just lets you select and automatically move things, but I don't really use that ever. Never have and probably never will. But yeah, this is just what I like to keep it as default. You can also click this and hold and easily select whatever you want here if you forget your hotkeys. Anyway, so that's selection mode and loop cuts. Loop cuts obviously can be a useful thing because you can super easily get these super useful loops on your model, and you can combine it with things like beveling, for example, and just really make something crazy if that's what you want to do. You can edge slide as well, and you can see at this point, like, now you're going to start to realize just how much you can do in Blender with modeling. It's just so useful. So a couple other selection things that I want to tell you about before we move on from like selecting and all that is something called grow selection. So if you select a vertice or face or edge, it doesn't matter. You can hit Control numpad plus on your keyboard, and it's going to basically expand that selection. So an easier way to show you this maybe would be if, for example, I added a cube up here, and let me just maybe on the top of this cube inset a bunch of times, whoops, that was too much, and I just went like this. So you can see I have this face selected in the center here, right? So if I hit Control numpad plus, it's just going to keep on expanding that selection. And if you hit Control numpad minus, it will shrink that selection. So that's just something useful to know sometimes, especially when you're modeling like a character's body and you want to add clothing or something like that. That's another topic, of course, but like, you know, it just comes up in many occasions and it's very useful. So it's important to know that. One other thing I want to introduce you to is the knife tool. So if I hit K on my keyboard, it will bring up the knife tool, and you can hit escape to cancel it. So let's say I went over here, and in vertex mode, I'm just gonna hit K. You can select this vertex right here, just click it, and then you can basically move your mouse, and it's gonna give you this purple line, which is basically going to be the place to which you cut. So if I go to this edge here, for example, I can click again, and then maybe click here again, and you can really just go all over the place if you want, but I recommend to just cut edge to edge, don't cut like in the middle here. I don't recommend that. So if I just hit here maybe, and then I just hit enter once I'm done, you can see what that did was it basically cut the geometry. So now if I wanted to like extrude this up, or maybe like scale it in and then move it down. It's up to you what you want to do with it. So oftentimes I like to use this together with loop cuts. So for example, if I add a new cube here, and let me just add like, I don't know, edge loop down here, and then let's add an edge loop here and drag it, and then left click once we're done. And let's just add a few going across the top here. I like to use a setup like this oftentimes to then take my knife tool and kind of just cut in a diamond shape like this, and then hit enter once I'm done, which allows me to have these basically messed up edges on my model. It's useful a lot of times in making things like rocks or wood, or like, you know, concrete, and just in general pretty much whatever asset you're modeling. If you want to have like messed up edges, that's just like a useful thing to do. So yeah, if I add a cube once again, we can kind of practice these things a bit. So let's say I wanted to make like a wooden type of plank. You can hit SY, SX, and then like SZ. Maybe let's hit SY again to scale that. I'm going to go into edit mode, hit numpad period to focus on this object that we're working on. And what you can do is add some loop cuts, for example, just like this. Maybe add a couple going across the center, or let's add 3 actually. Maybe add a couple going across the center, or let's add 3 actually. And what you can do is maybe take this edge on the side here, Control B to bevel it. And you'll notice our bevel is really grown for some reason, like really just oversized. And the reason why that is, I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo that. The reason that happens is we were scaling it in object mode, which for whatever reason kind of messes with the sensitivity on like beveling and insetting. So if we try to, like, for example, select these faces and inset them, you'll notice the inset is like really uneven for some reason. Like on the right and left, it's really in, but on the top and bottom, it's not in at all. So the way to fix issues like this when you encounter them in Blender is you hit Control A and you apply all transforms. Before I do that though, I want to show you what this is actually doing. So if we go to item, you can see we had adjusted our scaling because we were doing like SX and like SY in object mode. But basically if you hit Control A to apply all transforms, it'll set that all to 1, which is going to fix this issue. So now if we inset, it's going to be perfect. Or if we take this and bevel, it's going to be perfect as well. So I'm just going to undo that. Do keep in mind though, there's a trade-off with this. So for example, if I add another cube, I just want to show you something. If we do our rotations in object mode like this is how I usually like to do it. And if you keep your rotations in object mode, the good thing about that is you'll always be able to do like GXX or GYY or GZZ, and it's going to be perfectly aligned with the local X, Y, or Z axis. However, if you apply all transforms after you've done these changes in object mode, you're going to lose that. So if I hit GZZ now, it's not going to like do anything anymore. It's not going to work. Or GXX or GYY. So just keep that in mind. So yeah guys, just to make sure that you got that little bit there, pretty much if you rotate an object, you can do GXX, and doing the axis twice, like GXX, GYY, GZZ, it enables what's called the local axes. Same if I did like SXX, now it's going to scale on the local x-axis instead of just the regular x-axis if we do SX, right? So that's just one thing to note. Local axes are a thing, and they can be very useful. Like in the flower, we're going to be making petals that are kind of like in a shape like this, so you'll see me using like SYY and SXX a lot to kind of like manipulate things. So, and for this reason, I generally recommend if you want to make rotations to your model, do it in object mode instead of edit mode, because if you do rotations in edit mode, it might just make it a little bit like messed up. You can see now the local z-axis is screwed up. So yeah, if you want to scale or rotate just part of your model, don't worry, you can totally just do that in edit mode. But if you want to make a scale or rotation or movement to everything, I'll generally recommend that you do it in object mode. Honestly, my advice though is like, don't think about this too much. When I'm working, I don't really think about this much at all. I really just work, to be honest. And if you do like mess that up, for example, you can always use Alt-S instead, and that's gonna go along the normals. So that's just one workaround for it. But really, don't think too much about that, especially when you're new, because even I like don't think about that much. Anyways, let's go back to our little plank right here. So if you wanted, you could, you know, select these edges around here, and maybe hit Control B to bevel them a little bit, just like that. And if you wanted, you could take this edge here and hit Control B to bevel it, and maybe scroll up once to get a cut in the center. Left click once you're done, and I want to introduce you to something now called vertex merging. So if you select one vertex and then shift select another, you can do M and at center, at first, and at last. You don't have to worry about these two here. So if we do M at last, which is going to merge it to the last one we selected, you can merge a vertex like that. And we could select this edge here, for example, and then hit like Alt-S to kind of move it in like that, which is going to give us like a messed up type of edge on our plank. And there's really like no end to like what you could do in this, right? So over here on this side, for example, you could do literally the same exact thing by selecting these edges, hitting Control B to bevel, and then merging this one at last, like that. Doing the same on the other side. And then just selecting these edges here, whoops, just like this, and hitting like Alt-S, and you can create a shape like that very easily. You'd obviously want to go in and add more variety to this, so it's not super boring, right? So just like that, you have all of this creativity to use. Okay, we'll come back to this wooden plank thing later, but I want to introduce you to modifiers a bit. If you go to this wrench tab here on the side of your screen, this is the modifiers tab where you can add modifiers to whatever object you have selected. The easiest way I can demonstrate this is if I hit Shift A and add a monkey, and let me just bring her up. I'm going to hit numpad dot on my keyboard to center here. You can see by default, if we go into edit mode, we have something that is very overall low poly. So if you click this add modifier button here, one common modifier that you'll always see me use is the subdivision modifier. So if you type in subdivision here, you can just click this and it will add it. And if you want to remove a modifier, you can click this X button here, just like that. Keep in mind for the subdivision modifier, a common hotkey for it is to just hit Control 1 on your keyboard, just like that. And you can basically increase the levels of subdivision here, which is basically going to subdivide the geometry, if that makes sense. I'll demonstrate this again for you one more time, but on a cube now. So if we take a cube, you can see this is what we have by default. And what you can do is add in a subdivision modifier on it, which basically what it's doing is it's subdividing each face on our model and also smoothing it, which is why it kind of like turned into a sphere. Now the way to apply a modifier so that we can actually turn it into real geometry when we hit tab is you can hover over the modifier and hit Control A. So now if we go into edit mode, that's been applied and we have regular geometry. So I'm going to undo to go back to where we were before when we had it. So there's also this button called simple, which is going to subdivide it without smoothing it. So if I switch this to simple, you can't see anything here, but if I do apply it and then I go into edit mode, you can see it subdivided each face into more, just like that. So the same applies for our monkey here. If I were to apply this, you can see now we have really high poly looking geometry. If I switch this to simple, you can see what we have before is this, but if we apply this, now you have something like this. So yeah, that's the subdivision modifier. Another common modifier that I might use is the mirror modifier, which allows you to reflect an object basically. So if I select our monkey, for example, and we want to mirror it, I'm just going to add a mirror modifier. By default, this is not really going to do much, and it's going to be pretty unpredictable, which is why I always like to add an empty to mirror over. If you see here, we have this thing called mirror object right here. And so what we can set that to is we can create a Shift A empty, and basically think of an empty like it's not like a real object really, it's kind of just a guideline that you use. So if I add plane axes, for example, I'm just going to bring this up with the GZ, and if I select the mirror object as this plane axes, now you can see what it's doing is it's going to reflect over that empty, and this can just be useful once in a while. So just like this, we have a reflection going, and if you want, you can just like select all of them together and move this wherever you want, and it's always going to just, whoops, let me switch this to median point. It's always just going to adjust the mirroring based off of that empty. You can also check different axes here, like for example the y-axis, the z-axis. So yeah, and that's something once again you'll get used to over time, but it's not like a super essential thing to know right now. Another thing to know about the mirror modifier is it can be used on a mesh as well in edit mode. What I want to do to demonstrate this easily to you guys is just basically go to our world center. Generally, if I'm using a mirror modifier like on a mesh to model, I'll always just keep it at the center of the world. Let me explain this to you. So if I hit Shift A to add a mesh, and I go into edit mode here, and I add a mirror modifier here, nothing happens immediately, but let's do this. Let's add a loop cut going across the center and go into face select mode maybe, and just delete this entire half of it. So now we only have this half on the right side of the y-axis. So what you can do actually, if you're just at the center of the world, you don't even need to use a mirror object. You can just switch it to y over here, and now it's reflecting over the y-axis, as you can see. And so if we go into edit mode, when we move one vertex, it's going to move the reflected one as well. So this can just be really useful when modeling sometimes. You can see we can select these in the center here as well. Say GY. just like this. If we add like anything pretty much on this side, it's going to reflect because of that mirror modifier. So I hope that makes sense. You can also enable this clipping feature if you want. If we don't have it enabled, what's going to happen is you can kind of like cross vertices over, which isn't really good. Like as you can see here, we kind of crossed it over, and now these two are overlapping each other, which is like bad geometry. So what you can do is enable clipping, and it's going to basically snap these vertices together and make it so that that does not happen. Generally, I will only ever mirror it over one axis, but you can try mirroring it over like multiple axes if you want, like this. Let me just disable clipping here. Of course, it's up to you. Ultimately, you can see here now I'm doing the X and the Y axis. And as usual, you have access to all of your regular modeling tools. Of course, you can hit Control A whenever you're done to apply that and get a single object. So I'm just going to delete that object now because we don't need it anymore. Okay, one other thing I wanted to talk about is shading smooth. So if we added a sphere, for example, you can see, you've seen this in a lot of objects to be honest, but it has like this very blocky shading. You can just right click and hit shade smooth to fix that. Now keep in mind this will not work in every case. If you have like a soft object like this, then just right clicking and shading smooth will work really well. However, if you have something like, for example, this wooden plank that we made, which is kind of a mix between like hard and soft. What you want to use a lot of times is if you right click and shade auto smooth, you can get this nice like auto smooth shading, and you can play around with this angle feature here to get it how you like. I think, let's see, maybe something like this is good. Don't obsess too much over this. The point is to just get something that looks overall fine, because in stylized art, having it like perfectly smooth shaded isn't super important. Same here on Suzanne, for example. This is like pretty soft overall, so if I shade it smooth, it's gonna look pretty decent, I'd say. If we try shade auto smooth, sometimes you just have to like try both of them to see which one looks better, which I guess that's a little bit better. But for a model like this, it's probably a good idea to add a subdivision to it and shade smooth, and now you can see that just looks amazing. So before we just had it shaded flat, but then if we add like a subdivision to it and then shade it smooth as well, it's gonna be looking so nice. So yeah, that's another thing to keep in mind. One other cool modeling tool I want to talk to you about is called Bridge Edge Loops. So if I have a cube here, let me just move it off to the side, and let's hit numpad period to center it. If I go into edit mode on it, and let's say in edit mode, I'm going to just put my 3D cursor here and add yet another cube. So now we have two. You can use this cool thing called bridging edge loops if you want to kind of like bridge two faces together. So for example, if I select this face, and I hit F3, bridge edge loops, it will bridge those two edge loops together. You can go down here also, and you can play around with these buttons. Number of cuts, for example. I never really use this to be honest with you, but it's like if you want to make a pipe or something, could be pretty cool. But yeah, that's just another useful modeling tool. Additionally, if I add yet another cube, and I'm going to get rid of this one here so it's easier to see, but basically if you're in edit mode on an object and you hit L, what that's going to do is it's going to select whatever basically linked part you have selected. An easier way to demonstrate this, to be honest, would be is if you're in edit mode and you select a face, you can hit Control L, which is going to select everything linked. So you can see it's selected everything linked besides for, of course, this cube here, because it's not connected at all to this. So if I select a face or vertex here or anything and hit Control L, it'll select everything in that component. And if I select this one here and I hit Control L, it will select everything within that connected component of the object. So yeah, that's just another cool thing to keep in mind. Let's delete that. Now, before we end this off, because we are very close to being done, I want to talk to you about some common modeling issues that you may face and how to deal with them. So I'm going to add a monkey to demonstrate this to you, and I'm going to hit Control 1 to subdivide it and right click to shade it smooth. So I purposely created this issue here on the top right because it's just something inevitably that's going to come across to you guys while you model in Blender. So sometimes you might be modeling something, like for example, let's say you were, I don't know, doing something on this monkey here and you had it shaded flat before, but then you tried like shading it smooth and it just got like all messed up for some reason in that area. This is a common issue that can happen in Blender where the normals are basically inverted. Sorry if that sounds a little bit complex, but basically it's just extremely easy to fix if you ever see something like this. So all you have to do is just hit tab to go into edit mode and select everything and just hit Shift N. And I would say in like 90% of cases, it's just going to fix that issue right away. On the off chance that it doesn't, when you hit Shift N, you might have to click this inside button, so you can try that too, but generally just like Shift N in edit mode with everything selected should fix it. Another common issue, which we already talked about, is if you have an object that you scaled around in object mode and you try to inset, for example, it's going to be uneven. We already talked about this. All you have to do is just hit Control A, apply all transforms to fix that. One thing to keep in mind though is if, for example, the object was out here, I want you to see here with this orange dot, if we hit Control A, apply all transforms, it goes away, and that's problematic because then if we try to scale, for example, it's going to scale based on where that orange dot is, which is called the object origin, which got moved to the center. This is another thing that's really easy to fix. So if you're wondering why, the origin is no longer in the center, literally all you have to do is just object set origin to geometry. So a lot of times on an object that I'm working on, you might see me be like Control A, apply all transforms, and then immediately after, go to object set origin to geometry. And that just like immediately fixes the issue pretty much. You can see our origin is back. So if we go into edit mode and we try insetting here, everything is perfect. Or if we try beveling, everything's going to be perfect too. So yeah, just keep that in mind. That's another common issue with modeling. One final issue I want to talk about is you may accidentally, when you're modeling, end up with overlapping vertices. So for example, I'm just going to take this edge here and just move it with a GG back here. So you might be modeling and you might do something like that, and like on the surface, nothing looks wrong. But the issue here now that you might encounter with your model sometimes is you might have overlapping vertices, which causes issues. So let's say I was just like modeling here, and then for example, I selected this vertice because I wanted to move it, or like this edge, and I was getting this weird intersecting geometry issue. Generally, issues like that are caused by overlapping vertices. So to fix it, you just select everything and hit M by distance, which is going to merge vertices that are on top of each other, which if you remember these right here. So you can just hit M by distance. So you can see here it says removed two vertices because this one here and this one here were on top of each other. And by the way guys, the reason why this works is because basically it just merges any vertices that are within this distance that you put here in the bottom left in this merge by distance thing. So yeah, that's how it works. So if we take this edge now, you can see it's working fine again. So yeah, those are the 3 ways to fix common modeling issues. I'm even going to add in a text object here to make sure that you guys get this. So 1, you can try merging vertices by distance. 2, you can try recalculate normals with Shift N. And then 3, applying all transforms. And yeah, so these are the 3 basically most common fixes that I'd say honestly in like 95% of cases it's going to fix your issues. Okay, so at that point, there is nothing else regarding modeling that I really have to say. One thing I didn't go over, which I'll tell you now, is you can actually move around any of these things in the viewport, like the timeline here, for example. You can drag it up, or you can drag this, for example. And if you go to the corner here, you can drag this up and basically drag in a new window and set it to whatever you want here. If you want it to be, I don't know, like another timeline, you can have that. If you want it to be another 3D viewport, you can have that as well, and just have like 2 of them. You can do this anywhere, like here for example too, I can drag down, and you can see it says join areas, so you want to be careful about that, because if I join areas, it's going to join them. We don't want that though. So we can drag this back up and switch it to whatever, like 3D viewport. So yeah, just keep that in mind. You can very easily switch all of this to whatever you like, or whatever layout that you want to use. So I'm just going to send this back to default by clicking here and then dragging and joining these areas. I want to now talk about something that I forgot to include earlier, which is a concept called separating a mesh into multiple objects. So for example, let's say we had a cube and we went into edit mode on this cube and maybe hit Shift A and added another cube or something like that. And so now in this object we have, like 2 meshes pretty much. If you go into edit mode and select everything, what you can do is actually hit P and then by loose parts, which is going to separate one object into multiple based on its components. So for example, this one was a separate part of the mesh and this one was a separate part, which is why it got split into 2. So if we had, for example, let me just bring this to the side and show you guys. If we had, I'm just going to select everything and hit Shift and D a few times, just like this. So now this one object is all of these 4 cubes. If you go into edit mode, select everything, you can do P by loose parts and it's going to separate all of them. You can also select 2 objects and do Control J if you want to join them. So now these 2 cubes have been joined to 1 object. And lastly, I just wanted to say, if you go into edit mode, you can select any faces that you want. Like let's just say we selected these 3 faces for whatever reason, and you can do P by selection, which is going to separate your selection as a new object. So if we do this, now what's happened is this became a separate object, and then this remained as the original object. So that's just one important thing to know, which is separating objects in Blender. One last exercise I want to do just to make sure you guys are a little bit more comfortable is I'm just going to delete this cube here, and let's just add a cylinder. I didn't talk much about this, but in edit mode, what you can do is you can select a face, vertex, or edge, and you can hit X to delete it. So if I have a face selected here, I can just hit X, then faces, which is going to delete that face. And then one thing with modeling, if you're going to make like a pillar or something, this is just like a common thing that happens in modeling sometimes, is if you alt click on this like edge loop, you can hit ES, and what that's going to do is it will extrude and scale in. And this is just a common thing that happens in modeling. So you could do like that, then you hit EZ to extrude up, then ES again, then EZ. And yeah, once you're done, you can hit like F on your keyboard, which is going to fill between whatever vertices you have selected. So yeah, that's just another thing to know about edit mode. Very versatile and useful, and there's just a million things you can do with it. But let's move on to the flower now. Now, before we get started, one important setting that I recommend you guys do is bind your context toggle to your tilde key or some other key. You can see what this is doing is it basically hides everything besides our actual objects, which is going to let you see the art that you're making a lot easier. So you can click this button up here to toggle it on and off, but actually what I like to do instead is just bind it to a key. You can go to Edit, Preferences, and if you go down to Key Map over here, you can go to 3D View, 3D View Global, and just scroll down until you get to the bottom, and it's going to say context toggle. It might be this one. I think it's actually this one at the bottom here, but either way you can bind it to whatever key you want. I have it bound to my tilde key, so I could easily basically turn this on and off, and that's something you're going to see me just kind of instinctively do a lot. At this point, I recommend you go to File, New, General to create a new file. Alright guys, so let's make a basic flower with leaves and stems and all that good stuff. The first thing we're going to do is hit A and then hit X on our keyboard and just delete everything. Let's hit Shift A and add a curve, path curve, just like that. And we are going to go down here to the Object Data Properties and go down into this Geometry tab. And under this bevel button right here, you can just adjust the depth, which is going to give it some actual geometry. And if you hit Tab to go into edit mode, you can take these points and move them around. I'm going to enable proportional editing up here so that I can get the circle and adjust everything at once by sliding my mouse wheel really easily. Additionally, if you hit Alt-S, of course it's going to thin it, so just keep that in mind as well. You can select any of these points and hit Alt-S to thin it. So just like that, I want to basically make a stem for this flower. So I'm going to start positioning these points in 3D space. I'm just hitting G on my keyboard and moving these around very simply. Now with curves, you can select a point and you can hit E on your keyboard to basically extrude a new point. So you'll see me using that a lot as well. You can do this as much as you want. The point here is just to make a nice looking stem, and that's it. Now what I'm going to do is tab to go into edit mode. I'll select a few of these vertices or points, whatever you want to call them, at the top here. And I'm going to hit Shift D, and then I'm going to hit P so that it separates it as its own new object. So just like this, we have a whole nother object of points, and I kind of just want to make this into a continuation of this main stem, kind of like a branch in a way. You can also select both objects, hit Tab, and then you can adjust both of them at the same time, just like this. I'm going to select this object and hit Shift D, and then Shift Z, so we can move it immediately after duplicating. And I just want to make this yet another stem. Maybe I'll delete these top ones here, so we can just adjust these really easily. I'm going to hit Shift D one more time and then Shift Z. And I just want to have one more stem in the back. I'm going to just hit Alt S on this point here because it's kind of like sticking out from the other branch a bit. So I just want to make sure it's tucked inside nicely. But anyways, yeah, as you can see here, I'm just working on it more. It's starting to come together quite nicely. And of course, the great thing about this is you can always make changes later. You don't have to get it perfect this first time. So the next thing we want to do is make our actual flower so that we can place it on top of these stems. The way we're going to do this is first make a flower base, so meaning the center of the daisy flower. So I'm going to hit Shift A and go to Mesh. We can use UV Sphere for this. And in this tab down here in the bottom left, we can decrease the segments by a decent amount. You don't have to do this, but if you want to make it a little bit more low poly, you could do that. Alright, so once I'm done with that, I'm just going to hit SZ to flatten it a bit. I think that's good enough, or maybe just a little bit thicker. Then I'll hit S to scale it down, GY to move it on the Y-axis, and I'm going to hit numpad dot so that we can just focus on it. Next, what I'm going to do is hit Shift A, or before we hit Shift A actually, I'm going to hit Shift S, cursor to selected, which if you see the 3D cursor here, it's at the center of the world. But if we do Shift S, cursor to selected, what that's going to do is position the 3D cursor at this orange dot here. You can see on my screen this orange dot is the center or origin of our object. So I'm just going to hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and now our 3D cursor just snaps there. And we can hit Shift A, mesh plane really easily. We have just gotten a plane now, so I'm going to hit S to scale it down, GX, and then maybe S to scale a bit more. And what I want to do is shape this into a petal. So the way I'm going to do this is just go into edit mode with tab. And I'm going to select this edge, so I have edge mode selected up here, of course. And I'm going to hit EX to extrude and snap on the x-axis. I'll select this edge here too and hit EX to extrude. And then if you want to even this out a bit, you can hit GG to edge slide these. It does not have to be perfect. And I'm going to extrude out one more time, EX, and then S to scale that down a bit. I'll then select this edge on the left here, and then with proportional editing still enabled, I'm going to hit S and just bring this box up. And I just want it to basically be thinner on this interior part here. All I'm doing is hitting S, and I'm using proportional editing to scale that down. Now what I'm going to do is go back into object mode and hit Control 1 to add a subdivision surface modifier to this. If we go to our modifiers tab, you'll see it's been added. You can increase the subdivision count if you want it to be even smoother. For the sake of this tutorial, we could keep it at 2 because this is a very simple object, and also I just want to make something that's quite smooth. Another thing we should do for really thin flat objects like this, you can see this petal is just like a really flat thing, right? So generally what I like to do is add some thickness to it. So what I'm going to do is add a solidify modifier. That's generally just a good thing to do when you have an object that is flat. You usually want to just give it some thickness, especially if you want to add like outlines to it or something like that later. So just keep that in mind. You'll very, very rarely ever see me not add a solidify modifier to a flat object. It's just kind of a best practice that I do. Now, all we have to do is curve this a bit. So the way we can do that is really easy. If you just go to edge select mode and go into edit mode, of course, just hit GZ, and then with proportional editing enabled, you can see how useful proportional editing really is. You can really just easily bend your petal object. Let's hit S to scale that down. Hit GX, and you can kind of just scale it down a bit more. At this point it becomes very subjective, and you want to do what looks best to you. You can also hit Alt Z, by the way, to enable X-ray mode to see behind objects, and just hit S, scale that down, just like that, and I think that's starting to look good. But I'm going to now, I think I'll hit Control R here, left click, and then right click to set that into place, and we have now yet another loop cut to work with. Maybe let's add one more here to give ourselves maximum control. And if you edge slide any of these edges with the GG, it's going to affect the way that it looks as well. I'm going to hit RY to rotate this on the Y-axis to bring it up a bit. Maybe I'll select this, hit GZZ, to affect it like that. You can also use Alt-S at this point. It's probably even better. With modeling, a lot of times there's multiple ways you can do things. That is something really important to know. Let's take a quick detour actually for me to explain that to you. So for example, if I added like a circle and I just went into edit mode on this and hit E to extrude down, easy, and I filled the bottom with the F key, and I select this loop with alt click and then fill the top. If you're new to modeling, you might be wondering like what the difference between that and the cylinder is. But the reality is this is like the exact same thing. There's literally no difference. The Shift A add cylinder is just a shortcut. Anyways, the reason I'm showing you that is because I just want you to know that in modeling there's different ways that you can make the same thing. It doesn't really matter how you do it, it just matters what the final result is. Okay, so I'm just going to adjust this curve a bit more, and I think that's good enough. So what we will do now, something really useful here is we have our 3D cursor at the center already. So I'll set my pivot point to 3D cursor, and then with the petal selected, I'm going to hit Shift D, right click, and then RZ to rotate along the Z axis. And since we have it set to 3D cursor, it's going to do it along the 3D cursor here, Z axis. So Shift D, right click, RZ, Shift D, right click, RZ, Shift D, right click, RZ. And I mean, you can just keep on doing the Shift D, right click, RZ, Shift D, right click, RZ. Now in nature, variation and variety is a very important thing. So I want to vary these petals so they're not all the same, if that makes sense. I want some to be shorter, some to be longer, some to be taller. You get the point, like what I'm trying to say. Some to be wider, some to be thinner. So if you select any of these, we can go back to median point now. I just want to basically make some of them longer, some of them shorter, maybe some of them like wider or fatter. And just basically make some random changes. I'm using like SXX, SYY to do all of this. Maybe GXX to move it along the local x-axis. And so yeah, you can keep on playing around with the shape a bit. I'm going to move the base up a bit and also scale it down a bit. I'm going to actually right click and shade smooth so it becomes smooth shaded. And we can actually select all of these and shade them smooth as well. Right click, shade smooth. Yeah, I think that looks good. You might notice it looks a bit weird on the sides, just slightly. I mean, I think it looks good overall and doesn't really matter, but sometimes it might look a bit weird. So to fix that, what you can do to make smooth shading look better is hit Control R and add a loop cut and sharpen the edges. So Control R, left click, drag. So this can make it look a bit better, but it also sharpens, so you have to keep that in mind. So I think it's a bit unnecessary here, so I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo it a bit. You could also, of course, select everything and do right-click Shade Auto Smooth, which is also going to work, but I think Shade Smooth look good, to be honest. So I'll hit Control Z to undo that. Okay, so now I'm just going to be making some various changes throughout this model. I think at this point you guys have the fundamentals down, so I'm just going to have it in time-lapse for a bit as I do some changes, just making things a bit different. And oh yeah, one other thing is you can rotate if you want to. So if I do like RXX here, or whoops, you could see, might be RYY. You can also rotate this so that it points down and then hit GZ after. Oh yeah, quick little tip is if you select everything and you go to individual origins, you can hit SXX or SYY maybe, and you can do it for all of them at once. So maybe let's do that, just to thicken it a bit. Okay, I think this is good for now, for our purposes. At this point, what I want to do to make things a bit easier is I want to hit Shift A and I'm going to add an empty we'll just choose a plain axis, and I'm going to hit GZ to move it up. I just want to basically use this as a parent for our flower right here, so that we don't have to select everything in order to move it. So an empty, of course, you can kind of just think of it like a marker, kind of a nothing object, if that makes sense. There's no geometry on it, it's just kind of a marking in your scene. So if we just select everything, and you want to shift select your empty, so make sure it's the last one you select, then hit Control P, Object Keep Transform. You should always use Keep Transform pretty much. I can't really think of any time where I just use any of the other ones, to be honest, so I always just use Keep Transform. So, no, just use that, yeah. So at that point, you can see when we move this, it also moves the flower. And you could hit RR to trackball rotate, and really easily just position it. So before we do that though, we have like 3 or 4 different stems here. I'm going to hit GX to move this, and I'm just going to leave this one here and just duplicate like 3 or 4 of them that we can place onto our flower, so that we have like a backup one here in case we mess anything up, which sometimes happens in Blender. So I'm just going to select everything. So just select all of this and hit Shift D, and we can then literally just place this wherever we want. I'm going to S to scale it down. Let's see, maybe here is cool. So pretty much at this point, I'm just going to be trying to position this flower into place. Don't overthink this. You can literally place it anywhere you want. It doesn't matter. So let's do that again. Select all this, Shift D. We can select our empty, and by the way, it doesn't matter if you select everything or just the empty. Like, both are totally cool. Alright, so let's take another flower, and you guys know the drill at this point. We're just duplicating them over and placing them on our stems. Keep in mind, you can have as many of these as you want. I don't want you to feel like restricted at all, like you have to follow exactly what I'm doing, but it's totally up to you. Okay, so now let's model some leaves. This is going to be pretty easy, similar to how we did the stems. Just Shift A at a mesh plane, and I'm going to start going a bit faster here because I hope you guys are starting to get the gist of this modeling stuff. Okay, so for a leaf, let's just grab this edge, hit EX, S, Control 1, and then maybe extrude backwards as well. So at this point you can see I'm just doing very basic modeling things to try and make the shape that I want. Let's add a loop cut in the center so that we can then use proportional editing to do GZ and just curve it by moving it up. And I'll just continue refining it a bit. And I'm going to add a solidify, of course, because this is a flat object. Now what I want to do is create some leaf variants so that we don't have just like one leaf going around our model, which would be just a little bit boring. So I'm just going to rotate this with RZ and hit G Shift Z to move it off to the side, scale it down a bit, and I'm just going to hit Shift D to duplicate. And maybe let's get like 3 different variants or something. Maybe we could have one be thinner. You could also go into edit mode and select some of these vertices and kind of like mess them up so that they become a bit more irregular, just how in nature it sort of is. We can also hit Control A to apply the subdivision, which then gives us more geometry to work with, and you can go pretty crazy with this afterwards, just messing things up with proportional editing. You can actually hit Control 1 again to add yet another subdivision after the fact. And I generally like to keep this before the solidify. So this is another thing you guys have to keep in mind, is the order matters on modifiers. So right now, here what it's doing is it's solidifying first and then subdividing, which is why it kind of got smoothed out around its edges. But if we disable the subdivision, you can see what it's doing first is solidifying, and then rounding that out by smoothing it. But if we flip these, and to reorder your modifiers, you just come here and click this button, or hold this button, sorry, on the right. So you just hold, click and hold, and then drag up. And now you can see that sharp extrusion from the solidify is back. because now we have it subdividing first, and then the solidify just comes after that, and the solidify never gets subdivided or anything like that, because it's coming second now. Let's right click and shade smooth maybe. You can try increasing the subdivisions to make the shading look better, because now Blender has more faces to work with to calculate the shading, because the model is subdivided more. Alright, so I think the subdivision after the solidify looked better, so I'm just going to put it after now. And I'm just going to mess this up even more with the geometry to make it a bit more varied and crazy. If you want, you can make an edge like this maybe. So yeah, just get creative at this point and make your leaves varied, and I'm going to leave it for a time lapse for a little while. I'm going to add another loop cut in between here, because I really want to add some like serrated edges in my leaves, like this, kind of like as if a caterpillar chewed it a bit. Let's add a loop cut here maybe scale this down even more. So you really want to add variety into the art that you're making. You just don't want it to be boring, because boring does not work, especially these days. But yeah, you'll see me being very playful here, making changes, maybe undoing them if I don't like them. I'm really just trying to push the boundaries and see how far I can take it, and then kind of like reeling it back if it ends up being not good. Okay, so we can adjust these more as we actually place them onto our flower, but for now, we can just put them here alongside our flower here. So these kind of become like assets now that we can reuse. So what I'm going to do is just select these three, Shift D to duplicate them, position them here, and then just start positioning them into place. This is pretty much the exact same thing that we did with the flowers earlier, but now we're just positioning the leaves instead. One thing I realized here was my leaves weren't curved enough, so you'll see I'm using Alt-S and proportional editing enabled to kind of curve it a bit more by selecting an edge at the top. If you want, you can take this bottom edge we have and hit E to extrude, and basically just kind of like move it towards the stem, so that this just better helps connect the leaf to the stem. And by the way, in edit mode, if you can't see your geometry, you can hit Alt-Z, and now you'll be able to see it. I'm going to hit Ctrl-M-X to reflect this over the x-axis so we could have a reflected version of it, just to increase the variety a bit. I think this is good. Let's just maybe select these edges at the bottom, hit E to extrude, and just extrude it down towards the stem to connect it up a bit better. Okay, hopefully this is starting to get good for you guys. Sorry, sometimes it can be a bit hard to narrate while I'm locked in, but I hope you guys are starting to get the gist of this. Let's add another loop cut here to maybe give it like a nice shape. Maybe let's add yet another one here and just really be able to give it this interesting look. Alright guys, so we're going to get started with the shading and texturing, but before, there's a couple preferences you should set. I also want to say guys, there's two types of shading that I'm going to be showing you how to do. One is with nodes, and the other one is using my custom developed add-on called Stylized Asset Suite, which basically lets you do texturing and shaders and all that without actually ever using the node editor. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to show you both ways. So this is me from the future. Of course, ignore this final flower model, but basically what I want you guys to do now in your scene is go to Edit, Preferences, and in Preferences, click on this tab that says Add-ons over here, and search for a node wrangler. It should come up here, and you should just be able to click this checkmark button. So check it if it's not checked already. If you don't see it here, you might have to click on this get extensions thing and just type in node wrangler. It might come up there, it might not, but I think in this add-ons tab it's going to already be there by default. But just make sure that this is checked. And then the next thing is, in the description of this video, you can download the Stylized Asset Suite Lite version. So once you have that downloaded, just click on this button right here and then do install from disk. Just like that, and you want to basically find your download so you could see Stylized Suite free.zip. Click the install from disk button on that zip file. I have the pro version enabled, so I'm not going to install it here, but that's the button you would click, and then you're going to be good to go from there. And by the way, for those of you who are on Mac, it's going to download a folder. You just want to compress that folder to a zip file, and then that zip file is what you can install in Blender. Alright, anyway, so let's continue with the video. Alright guys, so let's now basically start the shading process and adding our colors and textures and all of that good stuff. So in the top right now we're in solid view, and solid view is pretty much just your objects with no real shading on them, just kind of like a display thing. Now next to that we have viewport shading. Now viewport shading, you don't really have to worry about this much at all for stylized modeling, but basically what it is it will display the textures of all your objects, but it won't display any lighting or shading or anything like that. Now rendered view is the one we are going to be most interested in, because we'll be able to see our model with all of the textures, lighting, and just like everything together. So solid view and rendered view, these two are the ones that you're going to be working in most. So if we enable rendered view, everything just turns gray. So what we need to do is hit Shift A, and let's add a light sun to our scene. So you'll see it spawns at the 3D cursor. Now you have to keep in mind, sun objects, the position of it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the rotation. So rotating it does something, but moving a sun object does absolutely nothing. So if you see me ever move it, it's just for convenience. It's not because it actually does anything. If you want the sun to do something, you hit R to rotate it, or RR, and you can like trackball it like this. And yeah, so that's how that works. Now keep in mind, for stylized art, we'll very rarely use point lights, spotlights, or area lights, pretty much always just the sunlight. Now of course you can use point lights if you want, they come in handy like once in a while, but generally I'd say 95% of the time I'm focused on just using the sunlight, so keep that in mind. And if I do ever add a point light, it's never going to be the main thing, it'll always be like just a side, small thing in the scene, not my main illumination. So yeah, you can rotate this however you want, and you can toggle between solid view and rendered view. Obviously in solid view your sun won't do anything, and in rendered view you'll see it. In viewport shaded mode, you won't see the lighting of your sun, you'll just see the basic texture of it, which is nothing right now. Okay, so now the part that I know you've been super excited for. Maybe, maybe not. I know some of you guys probably are and some of you guys probably aren't, but shaders, let's get to the point. I want to now introduce you to shaders, also known as materials pretty much. I don't know, maybe technically there's a difference between the two, but I just use them interchangeably, shaders and materials. So if you hear me say one, then it means the other as well. So to basically add a shader to our object, we need to go to our shaders tab. So right now at the bottom here, we have our timeline. We can drag it up. This is used for, obviously, if you're animating something, you would go through a timeline, but we're just focused on shaders and texturing right now. So let's click this and go to the shader editor tab. You can drag the box up to make it a bit bigger. Now on any object you have selected, if you haven't given it any shader or anything before, what it's going to have is it's just going to have this new button. So what we want to do is click that. So I think let's start off with this leaf here maybe. Let's hit new. What it's going to give you by default, if you zoom in with your scroll wheel, and by the way, if you don't see your nodes ever, you can hit A on your keyboard and then numpad and dot, which is going to center it automatically. So just keep that in mind. By default, we have a principal BSDF, and I'm going to hit G to move that around. Then you can hit escape to cancel. So basically, this is something we are never really going to ever use for stylized art, because this is just specifically meant for realistic stuff, right? You have these sliders here, metallic, roughness, And then like all these tabs here you can play around with. But it's just for photorealistic stuff, not for the type of stuff we want to make. And the lighting is pretty blocky on this object, by the way. I'm actually just going to switch the order of the modifiers and then I think shade smooth, and that looks a lot better. But okay, so the point is we don't want this principled BSDF. It's just meant for realistic stuff. So what I'm going to do is select this and hit X. And we want to hit Shift A and hit search. Just type in RGB. You can get an easy RGB node, just like this. And select this color socket and plug it into surface. Everything we plug into the material output is going to be plugged into surface, okay? You don't want to worry about volume, displacement, or thickness, none of that. Don't ever think about any of these, just think about surface. And you can switch the color to whatever you want. So obviously we'd set it to like a greenish color, like this maybe, because we're trying to make a leaf. See how that looks. But the issue is we lost our lighting information. So how do we get it back onto this? Well, what we're going to do is hit Shift A, search, and then add a diffuse BSDF. So just type in diffuse and you can add this. Now, what does this do exactly? So right now, this is just a node in our tree. It's not connected to anything, so we're not seeing it at all. If we want to visualize what this looks like, we can take this BSDF and plug it into surface. And this is what the diffuse BSDF does. It just gives us a basic lighting, completely basic lighting. That's what we want. And this is just going to be a common node setup that I always use, so it's good to remember. Unless you want to use my stylized add-on that I developed, which is you don't have to like do anything with shaders, but I'll show you guys how to use that later. Anyways, hit Shift A and type in shader to RGB. What this does is it pretty much converts this diffuse BSDF, which is physically based, and it converts it into an RGB rasterized type of thing. Pretty much, that's a fancy way of saying it converts it from being something realistic to something that can be stylized and manipulated in terms of its values and colors and all that. Basically, it just tells Blender, like, look, hey, we don't want this to be realistic anymore, so let's just convert it to RGB so that it becomes a bunch of colors that we can then manipulate. So how are we going to manipulate these colors? We can hit Shift A and add a color ramp node and plug it here. And what this lets us do is literally just play with the colors of the lighting. We are literally just like manipulating as we please. And we can reset this color ramp right here. So what I like to do is switch this from linear to constant. And I drag up this white flag until I start to see the lighting. And you can see now we have toon shading pretty much. This is now a toon shaded object. So this is called a toon shader pretty much. What we've created just now is a toon shader. And what we can do is we can take our RGB node and let's drag this out and type in multiply. We want to use mix multiply. Math multiply is for mathematical things, but this mix is meant for color things. Just a good thing to remember. And let's basically plug this into the A and then plug this color ramp into the B. And if you want to quickly view a node, by the way, you can hit Shift Control Click on a node. So if I Shift Control Click on RGB, it will just view it by automatically plugging it into surface. And if I Shift Control Click on color ramp, it'll automatically view it. Pretty much what we're doing is we are multiplying the two of these together. And what that results to is this. So we've now multiplied them together, and now we have lighting, which we can dynamically slide on our object. You can of course also change the colors here to whatever you want. So if I wanted the shadow to be red, I could easily tint it and do whatever I want pretty much. But I'll just hit escape there because I don't want to mess with it for now. Now what I'm going to do is I want to basically copy this shader, which we can rename here. Let's call it leaf shader. And I just want to basically copy this over to all the other leaves that we have. So I'm going to select all of them with shift click, then shift click this one and hit Control L, link materials, which is going to link the material to all of those. Now for the stem, I want it to also have pretty much the same shader, but just a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is select the stem, shift select the leaf, Control L, link materials. But now for the stem, I want it to be a slightly different color. So what I'm going to do is hit this 6 button. It might be a different number for you depending on how many objects you have using the material. But basically what it does is it will separate this as its own material now. So now you can see it's no longer affecting the other leaves. So then I'm just going to select these other stems and shift select this one and hit Control L, link materials. So now all 4 of those stems have the same material. And we can easily adjust it however we like. You can easily adjust the shading right here. Very nice. So congratulations, you have made perhaps your first shader. If you take your sun, you can still rotate it around and basically do whatever you want pretty much. And the shader is going to update in real time, which is just awesome. Now let's copy over our toon shader to these flowers here. I think one of them I'm going to reserve to show you how to do it with the add-on, so stay tuned for that. But let's just get some more practice with nodes. Let's do this flower on the right here. So let's select one of these petals and then maybe just like shift click this one, Control L, link materials. So now this one has copied over the material, but it's still sharing the same data, which we don't want. So let's hit this 6 button. So now it's its own material and we can set it to maybe a white color, maybe tinted a little yellow. You can adjust the shadow multiply, and you can also of course adjust the color ramp slider, which is going to basically adjust the spreading of the lighting, just like that. So let's select all of these and then shift select this, Control L, link materials. And now they have gotten that same material. And let me just nudge this a bit to make it look better. At this point, guys, it's going to be very artistic and you just kind of make it look how you want it to. Now we can do the same for this base here. Let's just copy over it and then hit this button. Switch this to be an orange color. Maybe raise the value. I don't think it's thick enough though, so I'm going to hit SZZ to just thicken it some more, or maybe GZZ. So yeah, at this point, guys, there are going to be sometimes time-lapse, sometimes where I narrate, because it really becomes artistic at this point. Like, you're just making changes back and forth and seeing what you like, as you can see me doing a little here. Okay, so still on shaders, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you can easily draw in some leaf veins on your leaves. Before we texture paint on anything though, what we need to do is something called UV unwrapping. I want to try and explain this to you in the simplest way possible. Pretty much, let's say, for example, we add a cube. Let's just keep it as simple as possible. So let's just say you're drawing in Krita or Procreate or something, right? So let me just draw it here. Let's say this is your Procreate canvas or something like that, and you're drawing and you're drawing. On a 2D canvas, everything is fine because it's just completely flat. There's no mapping that needs to happen. However, on a 3D object, if we want to texture it, we need to basically lay out all of the faces flat so that then there can be what's called an image texture. So pretend this is like the image texture. And this image texture stores all of like the strokes or drawings or whatever that we've made. And basically the way this works is all of the faces of a 3D model get placed onto a 2D plane, which is technically called a UV map. A UV map is literally just the faces of our model laid out onto a 2D plane. So for example, this cube has however many faces, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's say the UV map of this cube looked something like this in the 2D space. 6 faces like we had on this cube here. So then what happens from there is if on this image texture, if we draw on the image texture, then these strokes are going to show up in those corresponding areas on the model. So for example, let's say like this face right here corresponded to like this face in 3D space or something. Then what's going to happen is when we draw on this one, it's going to show up over here on our model. So I hope that makes sense. Literally all I'm saying is the faces get laid out onto a 2D plane, and on that 2D plane we can basically draw on it, and those strokes that we draw are going to show up on the model. That's pretty much how UV unwrapping works. Now let's do just a little bit of practice with this. I don't want to go too crazy. So the next important thing to know when it comes to UV unwrapping is something called seams. Now I was hesitant to include this part in the video a bit because I don't want to confuse you guys or get too ahead of myself, but I just want to show you a concept that I hope makes sense to you at least. So let's just say we turn this cube into some sort of wooden plank that we wanted to unwrap. So let's just take these faces and move them around a bit, and we wanted to UV unwrap this. Well, the problem is if we tried to UV unwrap this, Blender doesn't really know what to do. Alright guys, just cutting in here to give you an example of that. So let's say we tried to unwrap this cube. If we do U unwrap, you can see we get like an error, and that's just going to happen a lot of times when you try to just raw unwrap something without marking any seams. So what we have to do a lot of the times is add something called seams. And what seams are, simplest way I can put it, is they will section off different parts of your model as islands in the UV map. So if I hit Control E, mark seam on any edges that I have selected, when I unwrap this now, what's going to happen is this area within the seams is going to be one island, and this other area is going to be another island. I think it's best if I just show you. So if you select everything and hit U, unwrap, and I always use the unwrap angle based one, by the way. I don't really use the others ever. And so if you go to the UV editing tab up here, you can actually see your UV map, and you can see what's happening now, which is just as I was telling you guys, the area that we seamed off becomes its own island in the UV unwrap for this model. And, you know, if we did this again on this side, maybe, if we like marked more seams here, and then we unwrapped again, now we're going to have two islands. So this is like the back, this is the front, and then this part here is just the rest. I really don't want to confuse you guys, but what I'm trying to say here is sometimes on your model, or like most of the times whenever you make a model, you'll have to add seams to tell Blender where to section off different parts, and those seams that you place will affect the way the unwrap looks. The reason seams are necessary is because a lot of times Blender can't like automatically solve how to unwrap the model, so placing seams just kind of helps Blender lay out the model in a UV unwrap. Okay, hopefully that wasn't confusing. If it was, don't worry about it, honestly. It'll make sense to you with time. But yeah, anyways, the amazing thing about the model that we made here is we don't have to really do much unwrapping at all. And the reason why is because these objects we have are all completely flat. Like this petal here and these leaves here, it's all flat. Okay guys, so now what I want to do is unwrap these leaves because I want to texture paint on them first. So I'll just select all of them and hit tab to go into edit mode. Select everything and then hit U unwrap. You'll notice we get an information message where it says object was unwrapped on non-uniform scale of mesh. If you want to get rid of that, what you can do is hit Ctrl A, apply all transforms, which is going to reset the scaling on all of the objects. The only issue is the solidify modifier might get messed up a bit, so you might have to play around with it again and reel it back. That being said, that quote-unquote error message, it's actually not a big deal and it doesn't really matter. And actually, like a lot of the times you'll see me just completely ignore it, so it's not something you have to worry about much. For some leaves, you'll notice the solidify is like going in the wrong direction. Like when I increase it, it's going like up instead of down. So to fix that, just tab to go into edit mode and hit Shift N, and that will recalculate the normals for you. And just like that, it will be fixed. Okay, I think that is good enough. So what I'm going to do now, select all these once again. So we don't have to mark any seams here, just hit U unwrap. If you go to the UV editing tab, you'll see it packs it here. So this is how our UV map looks overall. So now that we've unwrapped our objects, I want to draw in some leaf veins on them. So let's go back to the material, and what I want to do is move this toon shader part to the side a bit, and after the RGB base color, I want it to then draw in the leaf veins and then get multiplied by the toon shader. So what I'm going to do is just select these and hit G to move them off to the side. I also want to just get rid of the panel on the right side, so I'm going to hit N to get rid of that. And then I'm going to hit Shift A and add an image texture. Okay, so in image texture, we just want to hit this new button. For the sake of what we're doing here, 1024 is definitely enough, but I'll use 2048 because I don't really mind more quality, and we can call this just leaf veins. And that's all you have to do, just click new image. And what we want to do is drag this color out to a mix node, just like this, and then we're going to plug the color into the FAC. It's not exactly obvious right now as to why I'm doing this, but let me just show you guys. So basically this leaf veins image texture, I'm going to plug it in to the surface output so you guys can see what it's doing. Once again, a shortcut for that is Shift Control Click. So you can see by default it's in black, but if we go to object mode here, switch it to texture paint mode, what we can then do, and by the way I recommend hitting numpad period so you could focus on your object, is you can draw. Now, you can see it's not doing anything here because we have our color up here set to black. So I'm going to set this to white and the second one to black. Basically, the second color is the one that it draws with if you hold Control and draw. And this first one is just regular draw. So if I draw like this now, you can make your strokes and really easily, just like that. You can hit Control Z if you ever want to undo anything. But just like this, you can easily draw in some leaf veins now. By the way, if it's not working for you, one thing you could try is tab into edit mode, select everything and hit Shift N. And that will probably fix any issue. And by the way, if it's still not working, make sure up here in this menu you have the name of whatever you called your image texture selected. Like you can see it says leaf veins over there for me. So make sure this menu says the name of that image texture you created. If you don't see it there, try hitting tab twice, it might fix the issue. So yeah, at this point just be creative and draw in some leaf veins. So I'm holding Control when I want to erase because Control will use black and then regular uses white. Okay, so now that we're done with that, What we've basically created using this image texture drawing with black and white only is we've created a mask. So basically what the mix node does, anything that gets plugged into the factor will let you interpolate between A and B. So since we have what we drew here, this mask that we drew on this leaf veins image texture, we have it plugged into the factor. Basically the areas that are black in this mask are going to become whatever is A, and the white areas are going to become whatever is B. So I'm going to shift control click this so you guys can see what's happening. Basically, since we have RGB plugged into A, and A is for black areas, all these black areas are just going to be whatever we had previously. And then these white areas, since they correspond to B, it'll be whatever we have here in this B slot. So you can see here now what we can do is just drag this and set it to pretty much whatever color we want. And by the way, here at the top is where you can select your image texture. Right now we only have one, so there's no issue, but if you run into issues, it might be because you don't have your image texture selected up here, so make sure it is. And now we can draw like in rendered view with the whole shader happening in real time, which is just very cool. By the way guys, at this point, it doesn't get like that much more complex than this. So you have like a lot of the fundamental skills at this point, definitely. Okay, so now all we have to do is pretty much just continue throughout the model adding more veins. So I'm going to kind of speed through this. And by the way, to easily in texture paint mode jump between object to object, you can hit Alt Q and it will just automatically jump just like that. So I'm just going to be very quick here. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to kind of erode the strokes a bit, so that's what I'm doing here. If you want, you could also add in some little like pencil marks too, just to give it more character. Okay, so I have drawn in the basic veins for these leaves. Now I want to introduce you to a more dynamic way of adjusting the colors that you draw on your leaf veins, which is instead of using just like a solid color here in B, let's try something else. What we can do is take this RGB and drag out a hue saturation value node and use the color input, so make sure it's plugged into color. And then you just plug that into B. And now you'll see nothing happens immediately, but if we go and mess with this, we can easily now just shift the value of what we had previously. And it's just like much more useful, in my opinion. You can shift the hue, saturation value, and all of that is going to be based on what you had previously. So as we shift the color now, the hue saturation value shift updates as well, right? Because before what we had with just color, let's say for example we had it as dark green, which makes sense here, but when we shift the color it doesn't update, right? So that's why I just like to use this method of using hue saturation value instead. Let me just make that easier to see. And yeah, this is just like much more useful in my opinion. Okay, so I want to just make some small changes to make this look a little bit better. For one, I'm going to shift the color of this to be a bit more on the orange side. You can hover and hit Control C over a color and then paste it in another color slot for a different material. So that's just some advice. I want the bottoms of these stems to also be a little bit thinner, so I'm just gonna hit Alt S and maybe enable proportional editing so we can get it nice and smooth. I also want the base of our flower to be a little bit bigger, because I looked at pictures and in nature, they're generally a bit bigger than this. So yeah, I just kept playing around with the flower base a little. I even tinted the shadow of it to be a little bit red. Okay, so before we go any further, let's talk about the add-on version now, which is going to be way easier than any of this. So I'm going to hit N to bring up the N panel, and if you go down to Stylized Asset Suite, which most of you guys probably have the free version, so it'll say Stylized Asset Suite Light by Crazy Saw at the top. And basically if you have an object, so let's do it on this petal, you can just hit New to create a new material, and just like in Photoshop, you have base color here, switch it to whatever you want, let's use white maybe, and tint it to some color like this, maybe increase the value. Now to add lighting, all you have to do is add a stylized 3D lighting main effect, so just add it like that. Super easy, you don't have to deal with any of the nodes. You can increase the step count if you want to make it more stepped. If I zoom in, you can see what this is doing really clearly. Step counts just like this. You can increase the highlight value or decrease the shadow value. And you have all these just intuitive settings to use. Rim light, you can play around with this as well, although you might have to adjust this spreading feature. You have all this stuff that I just made pre-built into this. Anyways, 99% of the time I have tune step set to 1, so let's set it to 1, which is going to mess up the lighting a bit. But to fix that, all you have to do is play with the light slider / controller and pretty much just drag it back and forth until you start to see some lighting, just like this, similar to using the color ramp on the shader editor. After you're done, just select your objects and then shift select the last one and hit Control L, link materials. That was just way faster than using the shader editor. And we can copy over the color we used here, actually, just to make it easy. Let's just copy that and then paste it right here, just like that. We can do the same exact thing for our base, so let's just click a new. And let's just slide this until we see something. In the shadow value, you can actually just tint it to whatever color you want. So let's tint it maybe a bit like that. I'm going to scale this up because it's like way too small. And yeah, so now I want to talk about outlines too with the add-on. So this is really easy. Keep in mind you want to make sure that your object has some thickness to it. So for example, when you add an outline this way, if you have a plane, just make sure you add a solidify modifier to it before you do this. But other than that, you don't have to worry. We already added solidify to everything here, and these stems are not at all a flat object, so you don't have to worry, neither are these bases. But pretty much to add an outline, just go to the add object outline panel right here. This is in the light version as well, so if you don't see it, look harder because it is indeed there in the light version. So just hit add effect, and once you add the effect, in order to access the thickness of your outline, you just click on this one here, this outline thing, and go to outline color and just increase the thickness, just like that. You can add it to this here as well. Let's hit add object outline and increase it. You get some clipping, so I'm just going to hit GZZ to bring this up a bit, maybe SZZ. And actually, to avoid this entirely, I want to introduce you to another way that you can add outlines, which is if we just delete this, let's hit fully delete selected shader on this outline material, which is going to get rid of it. You can go into edit mode and alt click on an edge on the bottom here maybe, hit shift D, right click, P by selection. So now what we've done is we've duplicated and separated this ring of vertices here. And you can go to object convert to curve. So now it's a curve. Go down here and increase the bevel depth, hit new, and just set this to a black color. Just like that, we've fixed the issue. And now we have a curve outline. And you can hit Control A, apply all transforms if it's uneven. So that's one way of doing it. It's up to you to determine what looks better. Maybe we can just move it off to the side for now and try the other way for the time being. Now, if you want to copy your outline to multiple objects, you can just select them and then shift select the last one and hit Control L, link materials. It's going to turn black, but that's normal, so just hit tab to go into edit mode and select everything and just click on your main material that you were using and just hit assign material, so it'll come back. You also want to do Control L, copy modifiers, because as you're about to see, I'm going to show you how to do it without the add-on. But basically, this method of outlining uses a modifier. Now I want to talk to you guys about one thing really quickly, which is material slots. So for example, if we went on our leaf here, if you go to the shader editor, what you can do is actually add multiple materials for a single object. So in this slots thing, just click this plus button, click new, and we can set this to like, I don't know, blue RGB and plug that into the surface. So let's say in edit mode, we wanted these faces to be that blue material. All you have to do is go to slot and then click on this, just hit assign, and it will assign it. But obviously that's not what we want right now, so let's just assign it back to the leaf shader. So that's how material slots work. Also guys, it's important to know that you might see me in this video when I go into edit mode and I use this like assign material button. The one down here in the shader editor and the one up here in the add-on, it's the exact same thing. So like as you can see here where it says assign material here, this is the same exact thing as basically these buttons here as well. You can manage your materials like both here if you want to use the add-on, or you could do it here in the shader editor itself, the same thing. Anyways, if you want to add an outline without using the Stylized Asset Suite add-on, it's really easy. You just add a solidify modifier, and this is just a thing that you kind of memorize. As for why it works, I don't even really think about it at all. But you set offset to 1, turn off fill, turn on flip, and set material offset to -100, just like that. And then in the slots, just create a new one and make sure you hit this arrow key so this new one becomes at the top. Hit new, delete the principal BSDF, and set this to an RGB. It can be whatever color you want, so maybe like red. And what you want to do is if you hit N on your keyboard, you can access this N panel in the Materials tab. And in Options, you want to turn on Camera and Shadow, which now, if we increase the thickness on the Solidify modifier, it'll give an outline. So just set it to black maybe, just like that. Okay, so I know that's really repetitive and redundant, but that's part of why I developed the add-on in the first place. But anyways, if you want to just copy over this outline to the rest of your petals, just select all of them, shift select the one with the outline, and then you can hit Ctrl L link materials, and then Ctrl L copy modifiers. Make sure you tab into edit mode and assign the material of the petal to everything. Okay, and if you ever want to adjust the thickness of the outline for all of them at once, you can just decrease it on one or increase it on one, and then Ctrl L copy modifiers, and it will just copy it over. So I'm going to do the same thing here, to be honest, because I think this is a bit excessive in terms of size. So I'll add in an outline as well for this flower base we have here, just like this with the add-on. I had to make a new material to just access the add effect panel, and then I removed it after. And at this point, I'm basically just going to continue around adding some small changes to the petals and stuff, trying to get the overlapping to be a bit better looking. So yeah. I forgot to give materials to these other two flowers here, so I'm just going to do it now by selecting all the petals and copying over the materials and modifiers as well, so that both the color and the outline copies over. And I'll do that for the flower base as well. Okay, here I kind of felt like the shader for the flower base that I made with my add-on looked a bit better, so I'm honestly just going to copy over the material to the one that we made with the shader renderer. So now they're all using the add-on version. And now let's just add some outlines for our leaves and stems. This is going to be very simple and easy. So I'm just going to use the add-on to add it one more time to, save time and not waste your guys' time. If you want to, of course, do it the manual way, I already showed you that, so you can go back and do that if you want. But I prefer to just save time and just click the Add Object Outline button because it's way quicker. So after you've added the outline, obviously just select all of your leaves and Ctrl L copy modifiers, Ctrl L link materials, and then assign everything to all of the leaves, just like that. On curves, you have to be careful. For some reason, it will just automatically assign the outline to everything, so just hit tab to go into edit mode once again and just assign the material, and that will fix your issue. One other cool thing you can do with the Stylized add-on is you can add an object randomization effect, which I think it is in the light version, so you should see it there, but what it does is if you add it, basically any object that has this material, you can assign a random hue, saturation, or value to it just to shift it a bit. So that could be fun to play with. Ultimately, I really didn't end up using this much though in this project, so I guess you can kind of ignore this, but I think it's just a cool thing to think about. Alright, so let's get back to making some more small changes. If you see it saying texture slots up here, by the way, you just have to click this and then go to your shader and then go to your image texture. You're going to see me hitting SXX a lot here on the petals with all of them selected and with individual origins as my pivot point. Basically what I'm trying to do here is I'm just kind of playing around with the size of it a bit by doing that. And keep in mind guys, you don't have to do those changes if you don't want to for your scene. It just depends on what you're making and how you want your thing to look. I'm making changes to mine based on how I want mine to look, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have to completely follow, exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to shift the sunlight as well just a little bit, so I'll select it and just rotate it a little bit in a different direction just to give it some more nice light variety on our model. And you might have to play around with the leaf shader color ramp, because otherwise it might look a bit awkward if you don't play around with it. And then in the one we made with the add-on, I'm just going to, in the shadow settings, tint the color a bit to be a bit redder. If you rotate the sun also, you might notice the shading on these petals gets a little bit weird. So if you want, you could add some loop cuts on the sides, which is going to refine the shading a bit. Now the only issue with this is going to be that it might be like sharpening your petals a bit too much on the sides. So if you select the vertices at the end, you can hit GG and just kind of like move that one at the end to smooth it out a bit again. But it's up to you whether or not you want to do this, and depends on what your sunlight angle is as well. You guys are also going to see me here messing around with the petals on the flowers a bit to kind of make like more, if that makes sense, by duplicating around more of them and thinning them. So the reason why I'm doing that is just to once again add more variety to the flowers. You can keep them like nice and symmetrical like they were before, or you can mess them up like I'm doing here. It's totally up to you, but I just thought it looked better by kind of like making some of them thinner and having certain areas of the flowers basically be more plentiful. Alright guys, so I want to do a little bit more texturing on the base of our flower over here, as well as the petals right here. So let's focus on this flower on the right over here. What I'm going to do is just select all of them, because first we need to UV unwrap them. So I'm going to select them all here. And once again, these are just completely flat objects, and really no thickness to them at all, only from the solidify modifier, but that doesn't matter. So I'm just going to select everything pretty much, and then I will select all of the faces in edit mode, and then I'm going to hit U unwrap, and we got that object has non-uniform scale thing. But if we look at the unwrap here, you can see it's perfectly fine. It's not a big deal. So yeah, that's a fine unwrap. Now what we're going to do is the same thing we did with the leaves over here with this image texture and this basic setup with the hue saturation value, the mix node, and the image texture. We're literally going to be doing the same exact thing. So if we go to the shader here, let's go and open this shader tab, and let's just take these, move them away a bit, and we just want to add an image texture, a mix node like this, switch it to color, and now in this image texture we'll call it right flower petals, and then we can keep it at 1024 by 1024. That is perfectly fine. So new image, color, plug into factor, and in B we're going to use that hue saturation value setup just like this and decrease the value by a lot. So now what we can do is just go into texture paint mode, and if we draw, you can see we can draw in some strokes like this. It's a bit low resolution, so maybe I could have used a higher resolution on the image texture, but I think it's okay for our purposes here. And yeah, so from there you can start drawing on these strokes. Keep in mind, if you want to switch from petal to petal, you just hit Alt-Q with your mouse, basically hovering over the different petal, and from there you can paint on whatever petal you want. So now, of course, you can do the same thing with these petals here, except for this one, we use the add-on. So if you want to do it with the add-on instead of using nodes, we can just add a draw/paint with a single color effect. Let's just add this. Keep it as simple as possible. And I want to unwrap this flower here, so I'll just select everything. Just unwrap it with U unwrap. Now one thing we have to be careful about is we want to now separate this flower petals to have a different material than these ones, for example. The reason why is because we unwrapped these petals, right? So the image texture we add to this shader is going to be specifically for this flower, not for these. So what I'm going to actually do is just select all of them, and on one you can just hit this make material / effects single user copy button, which will make it its own separate new material. So you can see if we adjust this one now, it's not going to be linked to anything anymore. But then we can just hit Control L, link materials, so all of these ones selected now share that new material, and just like that we have this. So yeah, over here we'll just set it to a black color and we'll call it left petal drawings, just like that. And yeah, you can go to texture paint mode after. Let's go to left petal drawings, and now you can see, just like we were before on the other flower, you can draw in strokes. Okay, so now you know the process for that. Remember to save your image textures by going to File, Open Recent, and then just select your project you're working on. Alright, so now we want to just add some dots onto this flower base, because in nature a lot of the times the flower bases have like dots on them. So I have the flower base using the shader from the add-on. I've showed you already how to make image textures using, what do we call it, using nodes. You just do a setup like this, and you can revisit those parts of this video where I made something like this if you want to see it again, but I'm just going to use the add-on to save some time here. Basically, what we can do is we can add a draw/paint with a single color effect to it. We can set it to a dark red color because that's the color I want the dots to be. Hit new, and then for the image texture, we'll call it like flower base dots. You can use whatever resolution you want. I'm just going to go higher here. Okay, so the issue here though is we haven't unwrapped this yet. So to unwrap it, we can try marking a seam going throughout the center here. So if I alt-click, whoops, let's alt-click this. You can basically just select an edge loop going across the sphere, hit Control E, mark seam, and then if we select everything and then unwrap it, if we go to the UV editing tab, you can see what it's done is basically because we put a seam going throughout the center, it unwraps it so that everything is divided into two parts like this. I don't really like this unwrap though because it's very like stretched here. You can see the size of the faces get really small in the center here. So what I'm going to do is just add even more seams to kind of like cut it up a bit more. So let me just add more going here. Let's alt click and add one going across the model horizontally. And let's add yet another one going this way. Control E, mark seam, then select everything and unwrap again. And you can see this is a lot better because it's less stretched and just way more even overall. That's that. Now let's go to rendered view and we can go to texture paint mode and let's select our image texture. And just like that, you can draw in some dots. So let's make this like really sparse, just kind of random dots going throughout the model. Now keep in mind guys, you'll notice it doesn't look right on our other flowers, and that's because we didn't unwrap these at all. But what we can actually do is just select all three of these and then shift click this one and then just do Control L, copy UV maps. So now all of these ones, if we go into edit mode on them, their UV map is going to look exactly the same. So sorry if that's a little bit confusing. It's just something you'll learn with practice. And trust me, like as you make more projects, you're going to get like really used to it. But basically now that these all have the same UV map as this one, that means when we draw on this one with an image texture, it's going to show up exactly the same on all of these. So yeah. Let me keep on drawing just a few more dots. And just like that, I think that is good enough. You can slide the visibility here if you want it to be less strong, but that is up to you. I think it looks good like that. One other thing we could do is we could add some strokes to these petals as well. You guys already know the drill though, I think, so you just select all of them, make one a new material because we want all of these petals to just have the same material, then Control L, link materials, so now all of them have the same one. Create an image texture, let's call it like top flower strokes. Set this to black, and then we can go to texture paint mode and just really easily draw in stuff. Oh, whoops, we forgot to unwrap it, so let's go into object mode, select everything. Of course, there's a million different ways you could unwrap this, but for this beginner's tutorial, I just want to keep things as simple and clean as possible. One other thing you guys can do if you want to composite this a little to make it a little bit sharper and nicer looking, you can go down here and open up the compositor. If you don't see anything, you have to check this use nodes button, so make sure it's checked. And what we can do is we can hit Shift A and add in a filter node. So add one, and then you can actually just hit Shift D on this and then place it here. So we have two of these filter nodes now, which it says soften. What we want to do is go up here and where it says compositor, just switch this to always. And for this first soften node, you can set it to like 0.45. And then for the second one, you can set it to diamond sharpen. And now you can actually get like a nice sharp version of this. And in real time, it's going to be composited, which is pretty cool. If you ever want to test like what it looks with versus without, you can just select both of them and then hit M, which is going to mute the nodes. So this was before and then this was after. And it's up to you then just to pick whichever one you like better. So I think with Sharpen it looks pretty cool. So I'm just going to keep it. And yeah, So at this point, what you're going to see me doing is something that isn't really a big change, but I think it kind of goes a long way, which is I'm basically duplicating these leaves that we already made, and I'm just going to like scale them down and kind of place them along the branches so that we have these smaller leaf variants pretty much. You can see here like I shrunk this leaf down by a lot, and I'm just playing around with this geometry a bit to kind of like attach it to the stem. So yeah, pretty much I'm just duplicating out more leaves here from the ones that we already made. So this is nothing new. You're literally just using the modeling tools that I already taught you how to use, and just taking these leaves, duplicating them around, and having these smaller leaves. Basically, the reason I'm doing it is because it introduces more variety to the model, and I think it just helps to make the piece overall look better. So yeah. So from now until the end, basically, you're just going to be seeing me making more changes to the model, like more small leaves, maybe making those strokes that I drew, those black strokes on the petals, look a bit better, maybe drawing more on the leaves, doing stuff like that to just increase the quality a bit of the work, but nothing like new, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's going to be the rest of the video, and I'll drop back in if there's anything I need to say. And keep in mind, guys, if your rotating is ever off, what you do is you go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry, and that's going to fix that issue. One thing you guys can do if you have the add-on enabled is you can go to the background settings tab down here and just change the background color easily to pretty much like whatever color you want. As you can see, I'm going to set it to like a blue color here, and yeah. Alright guys, so at this point in the end, this was my final product. I did end up decreasing the background color just a little bit, just to a darker blue. But overall, I think this is nice and done. Obviously, there's more you could change, but you have this pretty cool flower now that you've made, and I hope you've learned a lot throughout this process. And now, as promised, here's the chapter where we're going to be doing an introduction to sculpting. Alright guys, so we're here in this chapter where we're going to talk a little bit about sculpt mode in Blender and how it works. So I just have a basic cube here. Now basically to enter sculpt mode, the first thing we have to know is we can, with an object selected, go up here, and you want to switch it to sculpt mode. So just click it there, and now what you're immediately going to have is this big interface that comes up with all of these brushes at the bottom and all of these tools on the left. So the first thing I want you guys to do is hit G on your keyboard. Now G is going to bring up the grab brush. So you can see down here we have it, the grab brush. And just to introduce you to sculpt mode, I'm going to use this grab brush. Now any brush in general in Blender and sculpt mode, you can hit F to increase the size or decrease it. So you hit F and move your mouse and then click when you're done. And you can hit Shift F to change the strength, just like this, and then click when you're done. Now one thing you first have to understand about sculpt mode is that it works based on the geometry that you have in your model. So if I hit tab to go into edit mode, you can see this cube has very few vertices at all. It just has like these here at the top, these at the bottom here. So if we go to sculpt mode and we try to use our grab brush, you guys might be thinking that like, oh, it should just be like clay kind of, like I can just like drag this out. But I'm clicking and holding and then dragging, and nothing is happening. And the reason why is because you have to keep in mind that it's geometry based. So if I want to grab these vertices here, for example, I can do that. But you can only basically grab areas in your mesh where there's actual vertices, you know what I mean? So that's the first important thing to know about sculpt mode for beginners. So if we go back into edit mode, for example, and if we add like a loop cut with Control R here, and we add another one here, and then now let's go back into sculpt mode with tab, you can see now we have more vertices that we can play around with pretty much, right? Because we've added more geometry to our model. So in a way, you can kind of even think like sculpt mode as sort of just basically like an advanced version of edit mode, because, you know, both edit mode, it works off of the geometry in our model, but sculpt mode does as well, just in the same way. The only difference is that it's a bit more artist friendly in the sense that you have a brush which you can use just like it would be in actual sculpting. Now I want to get even more geometry onto this model, so actually what I'm going to do is just add a subdivision modifier. So I'll just add one like this, maybe increase the subdivision count by like 3, so now you can see we have a lot more geometry on our model. And you can use simple if you want, but I think I'm just going to use the Catmull-Clark rounded version, smoothed out version, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to hit Control A to apply it, so that now if we go back to sculpt mode, you can see we have way more geometry to work with. And if we take our grab brush, click and hold anywhere, we can just so easily, you know, move around the vertices and do all of this cool stuff. So once again, I want to keep this brief, and I'm just trying to introduce you to the fundamentals here. So we're going to go through a few brushes that I find to be most important. One brush is called the draw brush. So if you hit V on your keyboard, you can enable what's called the draw brush. And what this one does, just as you might expect, you can easily kind of just like draw geometry. And if you hold Control, it's going to do the opposite. So if I hold Control, it'll be like this, but if I just draw regularly, it will draw up. So that's another thing to know about sculpt mode, is if you hold Control while you draw, it will do the opposite of what that brush normally does. And of course you can hit Control Z to undo anything, just like that. Another brush that I find to be pretty important is the crease brush. We can access it by hitting Shift C on our keyboard, Shift C to enable the crease brush, and then you can basically easily just use it like this. You can see what it does is it kind of like creases wherever we draw, and if you hold Control, it's going to crease up. Pretty cool. And that also leads me into what's called the pinch brush. If you hit P on your keyboard, you can access the pinch brush and just easily pinch any areas. So oftentimes I use it in tandem with the crease brush because it can be pretty useful. And yeah, you pinch, we can just easily pinch. You can increase the size of your brush and pinch even bigger areas. Totally up to you. And if we tab to go into edit mode again, you're going to see everything that we did updates in the geometry. There's also the draw sharp brush, which I actually have to kind of like find it here because in previous versions of Blender it was actually up here at the top left, but they moved pretty much all of the sculpting brushes down here. so I have to look for it now. Okay, so it's here. Right next to draw, we have draw sharp, and this is just one that I use sometimes as well. It's kind of like a combination between draw and crease in a way. It's just like draw, but pretty much a lot more harsh, if that makes sense. You can kind of see it here as I draw. Now, one thing about sculpting is you might notice our geometry is still kind of like low resolution. So wouldn't it be nice if while we sculpt, our brush can basically like in real time generate more geometry in the areas where we draw? Well, that's actually very easy to do. If you go up here to the top, you can click on this DIN Topo button, which stands for Dynamic Topology. And if you enable this and then click OK, what's going to happen is now, if we switch to like the draw brush, for example, for some reason it doesn't work with the draw sharp, so you just have to use the draw brush or anything else pretty much. But basically, if you go close to your model and draw, now what it's going to do is generate new geometry in real time based on how close you are to your mesh. So if I'm far away and I try to draw, you're going to see it's going to be lower resolution. See, it kind of like destroyed everything. And if I go close, it's going to be a higher resolution. Now with dynamic topology, there's different modes here. You can see like subdivide, collapse, subdivide edges. You can play around with these, but I personally always just use subdivide, collapse, so I'm not really going to talk about the other ones. Same here, I always use relative detail, so there's no need for me to really talk about these. It's just not something in my workflow that I ever use. So I'm not going to talk about it here, but you can read the documentation if you want to know more about it. So keep in mind, dynamic topology only works with certain brushes. It works with the draw brush, does not work with draw sharp. Crease brush it does work with very, very well, just like this. Pinch brush too, it works with, and let's see, it does not work with the grab brush. The grab brush is strictly for grabbing geometry and moving it around. There's also something called the snake hook brush. You can hit K on your keyboard to enable the snake hook brush. It's not down here for some reason, maybe it is. Okay, here, yeah, you have to scroll on this panel here at the bottom to see it, but pretty much the snake hook brush is right there. Think of the snake hook brush like a stronger version of the grab brush, so we can use it like this. And one of the things about the snake hook brush is it does work with dynamic topology, so you can go close to your model and make this as cool as you want pretty much, right? So you can see this just has like a lot of use cases, and yeah, just like that, you can make these really, really cool looking shapes in sculpt mode in Blender. Look at that, we've made what looks like some sort of tumor, but yeah, this is a good introduction to sculpt mode, definitely. So another thing important to know about sculpting is masking. So if you hit M on your keyboard, it's going to enable the mask brush, and then you can of course play around with the strength. Usually I like to actually go up here and set strength to like 10 or something really high, so that when I draw with my mask, I can then basically have it like super harsh. Now, what's going to happen then is if we ever try to use any brush, the masked area is not going to get affected at all. So if I use my grab brush, you can see no matter how hard I try, this masked area is never going to get affected at all, no matter what I do. So we can kind of make like a canyon around it maybe if we want. And I'm going to toggle overlays so I could visualize what my mesh looks like without any of the Blender like markers in 3D space. And yeah, you can make cool shapes just like this using masking. Now, another thing you can do with masking, and I'm going to hit Alt-M to clear the mask. What you can do is you can basically select certain parts with your mask, and then if you hit Control-I, you can invert the mask. So now only this area is going to be the only area that we can affect in our model. So you'll notice now we can just affect this area without anything else. You can also hit A, hold A on your keyboard, sorry, and you can smooth your mask, grow your mask, shrink your mask, do all of these things. So I recommend you just play around with that, and yeah, there's just so many options there. Alright, so those are the main things to know about sculpt mode. Now, one other thing I guess I could say is if we, let's just shift A and add a monkey, I'm going to hit Control-1 to subdivide it and then just immediately apply this so that we have a lot of geometry to work with. Now, if we go to sculpt mode, there's also something called symmetry. Up here, you can enable like on the x-axis, for example, and now what's going to happen is it will be symmetrized for what we do on the right and left axis. Or sorry, on the x-axis, sorry. So, you know, you could just basically have your strokes with your sculpting tools symmetrized if that is what you want. And you can create a monstrosity like this. Nice. And also, if your sculpt ever gets super, super laggy, you could add a modifier called the decimate modifier. What that's going to do is you can basically decrease the amount of faces on your model, and it's going to kind of like maintain its shape and details and everything. This is like a really, really cool modifier. So you can see we have a face count of 20,000 on this. If we just set this ratio to like 0.2, you can see nothing's really even changed, and we can just hit Control-A to apply this. and now the geometry has reduced by so much. So before we added this, I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo it. You can see we had this before, and then if we add one and just set it really low, we can just easily remove as much detail as we want, or not detail, sorry, as much faces as we want. Hit Control A and apply it, and then boom. Just like that, your computer is going to be running a lot faster. Alright guys, so that is the end of that sculpting chapter. And so this is the end of this video, so if you've made it this far, congratulations, and I hope you've learned a lot, of course. If you were able to understand the stuff in the video, then definitely check out ukiyo-girls.io if you want to master this style. And yeah, besides that, thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!